everybody, and welcome to The Underneath. I am Cale Zeldin, your host, and my goal here today is not to bore you or to waste your time. And I'm really excited to have Nina Power, with us here in The Underneath to talk about iconoclasm, men and women, our culture, our social imaginary. So, Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cale.
Yeah. So I first came across you. I believe it was through Louise Perry's podcast, Maiden Mother Matriarch, and I think you've been on there a couple of times. How do you know Louise? Is this just?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've known Louise for quite a while now, actually. She's obviously a bit younger than me, but she's sort of much more sensible and seems to have figured out lots of things that took us 20 years or so to understand. So I think probably just through politics online, London cultural commentary originally, yeah.
Yeah, so you're in Old England, I'm in New England, and so I'm always intrigued by that. In fact, I'm heading to the UK in less than a week. I'm taking a group of students to Oxford, and so we do the whole Oxford thing. We spend only a day in London, but we're doing the Oxford thing.
Probably.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Last year, I happened to take the kids into London. We go to the National Gallery, and then we go to Westminster Abbey, and do all that. And I happened to bring the kids to London on the very day of, there was this big kind of rally in, it was at Trafalgar Square. It was a Tommy Robinson thing. It was like this big, I had no idea I was bringing my kids into any of that, but that was really quite a scene. I wonder what's the state of all that in England right now?
Well, I mean, there are many protests going on all the time. Just on the National Gallery, I have to say the new rehang is definitely worth a visit, especially from a religious point of view. They've really, the creator has really paid attention to the way in which the religious art would have originally appeared. So the new rehang is great. As for Britain, well, yes, I mean, multiple protests, and we've had weekly Gaza protests for a long time. Which have been very contentious for various reasons. There are obviously protests, more localized protests going on at the moment around sort of rehousing of refugees and so on. And yeah, it's a pretty turbulent time for Britain.
Yeah, I've been paying attention. I'm an American, obviously, but I pay attention. I guess you could probably call me an Anglophile on some level, whatever that means. But I'm struck. I know Louise again was it David Metz on? Betts, yeah, a couple of months ago, and that was a real eye-opening conversation. And the thought of civil war is just like so wild. I don't know, to me, obviously I've studied a lot of civil wars, America's, the Civil War in England, the French Revolution. But to think, it's so strange in 2025 to think that we could actually live through a revolution in a first world country is a pretty mind-blowing thought experiment. Why do you think it's all of a sudden something that people are talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about civil war, there's obviously various different kinds, and I think Betts is sort of careful to talk about things like feral cities and kind of competency crisis, and there is I think it's been going on for a long time, and I think we have a sort of feeling of decline. The infrastructure is kind of failing, everything from trains to substations blowing up, and general sense of kind of slow immiseration, boiling the frog. But I think one of the most significant aspects of the current situation is this kind of total collapse of trust in the powers that be, and a general feeling that they don't know what they do. Either they don't know what they're doing, or they're doing things malevolently, and they're doing things that are against the majority will and against what people have voted for multiple times. I mean, particularly around immigration, this is a very kind of big issue, and that there has been kind of big influx of people. That they were also kind of covering things up, like this recent story about kind of giving settlement to Afghanis. They kind of had a super injunction. We have this strange capacity where you're allowed to sort of, the state is allowed to say that something is secret, and also the fact that it's a secret is a secret. So that's the super injunction.
Yeah. Oh, that's convenient, you know.
I know. So there's sort of a general feeling that we're being lied to, and a lot of social tensions. I think people think that a lot of immigration is happening too fast. There's no sort of emphasis on assimilation. There have been quite a few terror attacks, you know, resulting in death, and I think people are they have no faith really in the state anymore, which is not a good position for any state to be in.
Yeah. So, okay. So obviously faith is a kind of magic word, buzzword for me. You know, we're talking about it. It seems, at least on some level, we're talking about this in a sort of secular way, a sort of a faith in the establishment, a faith in the government. But how do you hear that word faith? You know?
Well, with its multiple meanings, definitely in mind. And I think kind of recent bills that got passed, I mean, barely, but these sort of MAID type laws are coming in around sort of assisted suicide, so-called, but also signing late stage abortion, and the residually Christian and, you know, Catholic, and I'm an Anglo-Catholic, which is a strange
I'm familiar. It's okay, Nina. I'm familiar.
But, you know, it is what it is. I think there is a sense of, we are very definitely in a kind of post-Christian world, and that the residual Christian values, which are sort of filtered down, are also collapsing, if you see what I mean, in the absence of general faith in the religious sense.
Right. How does the lanyard, you said something the other day on X, I like that, the lanyard class, and I think that's a funny little image. But how does the lanyard class hear your framing right there in terms of a loss of faith? You know, how do they hear it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lanyard class term was coined by Maurice Glassman, Lord Glassman, who's a very interesting peer, is a blue Labour guy, you know, very, very intelligent man, who is on the left, but I would say very informed by Catholic social theory, and is concerned with the common good and all of these sorts of things, as well as the Labour movement and the history of unions. The lanyard class. So yes, I mean, here we're talking about, I mean, everyone from people in the BBC, NGOs, NHS, charities, the civil service. I mean,
universities too, right?
Say again.
Like universities.
Oh, universities. Yeah. How could I forget? I mean, this entire sort of, I don't know, sort of strand of the middle class, essentially, the liberal middle class, who are very technocratic. I mean, Starmer is the perfect symptom of this technocratic worldview, which is basically, I mean, not even really economically motivated particularly, but has a kind of rigid post-Christian ideology, which is informed by sort of combination now of like identity politics, and hard to say really, things that are opposed really to what we might understand as people's general concerns, which is for family, friends, place, meaningful work, and so on. You know, the idea that people are sort of fungible, you can that there's nothing important about tradition, or indeed tradition is something to be destroyed. You know, Britain has
it's suspect. It's suspect. Yeah,
and Britain has an incredible history, you know, and like every country, it's complicated, but it's, you know, to say the least. But I think this kind of sense that we should feel guilty for being British, that we shouldn't celebrate anything to do with our history, our heritage, but other people should be allowed to, has been very dominant. You know, since I was at school, we were basically being told to feel guilty for empire and this kind of thing. And it's a very non-dialectical understanding. It's not a complex historical account.
It's a radical. I think of it like a pretty serious oversimplification in order to deal with some sort of combinatorial explosiveness. You know, reality is complex, it's messy, it's all these things, but you can kind of put an overlay on top of things which greatly simplify things as a way of kind of, I don't know, being functional or operational, but the overlay seems to now itself be so clearly decadent. This disconnect between the ruling classes or the lanyard class and the people seems to be it's striking to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. And these kind of functionaries, they're actually actively anti-Christian, they're anti-family, they're anti all of those things that most people would give their lives for, actually. And yeah, they sort of operate as if they are superior, that they're not of the people.
Mm-hmm.
That through a university education or whatever, that they're somehow distinguished or distinct from the people. So then the population becomes like a problem to be managed. They're like managers, basically.
Yeah.
And the problem is they've engaged, they all have really delusional ideas about reality, and about
can
human
you
nature.
Yeah, can you lay that a little? How do you see that, these delusions? Because I share that sense, but I was wondering how you see those delusions.
Yeah, I think so. For example, some abstractions have become very powerful. So multiculturalism is an abstraction that has been tried to be put into practice for quite a long time now, and anyone who opposes it is sort of dismissed as far right. I mean, far right thugs is a phrase that Starmer uses. We obviously have people in prison now for writing angry posts about various terror attacks and so on. So they're kind of cracking down on anyone who notices or opposes.
Crimes of noticing, yes.
Yeah, it's very tyrannical, actually. And it is kind of anarcho-tyrannical, to use that phrase, because it's clearly, so one of Keir Starmer's nicknames is two-tier. And I think the judiciary, who I omitted to mention, although they're absolutely central in this, are basically being increasingly perceived to be not on the side of the native British population. And even to say native British population is very controversial, right?
Flag going off.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the sort of lanyard class have, that in order to sustain their own illusions and delusions, they think that they can kind of impose this post-Christian ideology or anti-Christian ideology onto others who will suffer the consequences of those ideas, and they won't. So they're sort of protecting themselves. And I think their revealed preferences, for example, living in nice areas, demonstrate that they do actually understand the reality of putting poor people in, amongst other poor people. And just to be clear, I don't blame people who want to come to a richer country for these kind of pull incentives and for whatever the push reasons. Well,
it's so obvious. All right, it's obvious. You set up an incentive structure, and people respond to those incentive structures. I mean, it's always shocking to me that people are shocked by this.
Right. So that's all going on, right? So it's not kind of aimed in that those people for wanting to move country in that sense. It makes sense, but we have a welfare system, a welfare state that was set up in a post-war situation with the NHS and benefits and so on, which is now also crumbling and collapsing because we have increasingly smaller numbers of people who are paying tax and being productive, and enormous numbers of people now claiming benefits. Not just people who've newly arrived, but also many people claiming disability and so on. I mean, it's a sort of symptom of a kind of very sad society, I would say.
So to this end, I stumbled upon this speech by, I think his name is Danny Kruger. Is he a member of Parliament? And I'm curious, how would, sort of 2002 Nina have heard that speech, and how do you hear it now?
I think, 2002, what was I doing? I think I was probably finishing my master's at Warwick, or maybe starting my PhD.
Yeah, I'm just using 2002
I'm
kind
just
of randomly.
Get my brain back into that. Yeah, I don't know. I probably wouldn't have understood it. I mean, so Danny Kruger gives this speech recently about the way in which Britain is a Christian nation, and he's speaking from really a Protestant point of view. So he's defending
the official church, the state church.
I get England, the king is the head of the church. It's not a Catholic position, although there is overlap because he's very pro-life and so on. He's a very interesting man. I have a lot of respect for Danny Kruger. I think, I would have defined myself probably as a Marxist or something like that. or I mean, I was very Feuerbachian, actually. I was sort of a kind of humanist, Marxist humanist. But 2002, this was a long time before whatever the progressive positions really came in. So, and that kind of leftism was really restricted more to the academy. Those ideas hadn't escaped containment yet. So Judith Butler wasn't the Queen of Gender, for example. These were ideas that people were discussing in seminars. So I think, I would have. I mean, I wasn't actually politically very active, to be honest. I was much more just academic and intellectual in a certain sense. But yes, I probably would have
studying philosophy.
Yeah, studying philosophy, and I sort of became much more politically active around the introduction of the fees in 2010.
What does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Sorry, yes. So in the UK, under David Cameron and the coalition government with the Lib Dems, they tripled tuition fees, which was a massive, the single biggest tuition fee hike in the history of humanity. And as somebody who had gone to a comprehensive school, which is like a normal state school, I felt very moved in the sense that I didn't want working class people not to have a university education if they wanted to have it. But I think in retrospect, looking back at Blair, so Tony Blair wanted 50% of people to go to university, but I think that was an incredibly cynical idea insofar as what it does is get people out of the workforce at 18 because they were no longer basically they no longer wanted an economy in which young people were working. And it also creates a hugely indebted class, which are then beholden to you. And that's really the lanyard class. So these are
good.
Borrowed, 50, 60,000 pounds, sometimes more to pay fees. You pay it back on your salary, but it locks down people to particular jobs, and it lowers your horizon, and it created, as we said it would, although it's kind of worse than we imagined in 2010 what would happen. It's created a climate of intellectual conformity in which people are afraid to challenge any of the increasingly deranged mantras of the progressive class, for fear of losing their jobs. And obviously we've seen rampant cancel culture in the UK. Lots of economic and social punishment for people who've challenged pretty much any of the things that we're now supposed to believe, but no one thought in 2002. So it's very rapid, all this stuff.
It's interesting. We were talking about incentive structures earlier on, and you can kind of anticipate that it might sort of create this preference cascade, not get out of line. I must say that, like, from this side of the Atlantic, my conception of British people is that, again, as a sort of a young, fairly ignorant but curious American, is that the English were very, like, orderly. That they get in queues like automatically, and there is this sort of radical level of social trust, and I guess would have struck me kind of as a kind of politeness. And, that always kind of resonated with me because I'm a Southerner. And, in terms of the interstate dynamics, the regional dynamics here in this country, New Englanders have a reputation for being kind of rude and businesslike, and Southerners are kind of slow and genteel and ignorant, but kind and polite, right? And so, but as I hear you say it, by creating a system with the increase of fees and taking all of these people out of the sort of the traditional workforce and putting them into what I guess we would call the knowledge jobs, something like that, that it has actually leveraged a kind of latent quietism in the populace. And so to speak out, to be a heretic, I mean, even to say what Danny Kruger said in an empty at an empty chamber of Parliament is a pretty wild development from my perspective. Is that fair to say?
Oh, definitely. And I think probably the 2002 me would have thought, well, we live in a Christian country, you know, or something like that.
You would have said that. You would have
I
said
think,
that.
well, I think I would have said, I think I would have assumed that sort of Christianity still had a dominance and a presence,
I
and
see.
therefore, you know, there was a dialogue to be had that was potentially critical.
Mhm.
But I think that's no longer true. I think actually, and I sit on a panel that looks at the persecution of Christians in public life now.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
my Gen X 90s position, which was freedom of expression, freedom of
Right.
speech, freedom of right to protest, you know, I was very involved in those kind of movements,
Yeah.
is interestingly now it basically sort of slightly transmuted into a kind of protection of religious belief, particularly Christian belief.
Mhm.
And there's definitely asymmetry in the way in which Christians are treated compared to, let's say, Muslims. You know, and Labour,
Yeah.
the left sort of entered into a kind of alliance with increasing Muslim population, particularly at the kind of council level and political level, which meant that they haven't applied the same traditionally leftist critique
Mhm.
of religion,
Mhm.
right, from a
Mhm. Mhm.
Marxist point of view,
Yeah, which is
at Islam as that they have at Christianity. It's almost assumed that Christians can just sort of take it, you know, oh,
yes.
it's okay to mock Christians like this. Do you know what I mean? That's become
Yeah.
a kind of default mode. You can laugh at Christians. You can.
Yeah, I mean, that's been, in terms of this country, that has been pretty, sort of bog standard conservative critique of the dominant American
Mhm.
university political media culture, is that you can trash Christians up and down and sideways really freely and with zero kind of pushback, but all other religions sort of would get a kind of elite pass. Um, and so it's interesting to me that there is a similar dynamic at play right now, to hear you talk about the situation in the UK.
Yeah, and as for the kind of normative behavior, I mean, you were talking about queuing
Yeah,
and these sorts of modes of politesse. It's again, there's
yeah,
become very double-edged. I think we have seen also just the collapse of everyday sort of niceties and the kind of
mm-hmm.
tacit knowledge you have if you've been brought up in a particular culture.
Mm-hmm.
So things that like apologizing if you step on someone's foot accidentally. I mean, I mean, these are micro
So those are
examples.
real. Those are
They
real.
are
Yeah.
real. They are real. And I think you know, everything from people playing music without headphones on the
Yep.
public transport, which is now a dominant feature of city
It's de
life.
rigueur, right? It's like yeah.
Yeah, or litter or whatever. I mean, they're all it's always the same signs of a sort of slow decline and a kind of, yeah, a sort of an absence of a unspoken set of social rules. Those have disappeared. And I think the British politesse and, let's say, the often way of not speaking directly about things
Yes, yes,
um,
yes. Yeah, yeah,
has
yeah, yeah,
come to bite us on the arse
yeah,
quite
yeah,
badly,
yeah.
because it has contributed to this kind of cover up culture, and people would rather not talk about horrible things like the rape gangs because they are horrible and they're very disturbing. And you know, it so that politeness has really somehow ended up backfiring, because it's meant that we haven't been able to look at things in their reality or face them head on, and people have sort of shuffled everything under the carpet.
Right. Because even when you just think of politeness as a kind of mode of being, for me, the sort of the inspiration for this kind of politeness, certainly the way that it has come to us, was really, laundered, filtered, given animation from a kind of shared belief in the notion of that men and women are made in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah,
Sort of
exactly.
explicitly Christian.
Yes,
Um,
completely. And this got translated a long time ago into English and Welsh law as neighborliness. So
oh,
we
interesting. Like there's an
yeah,
actual title called neighborliness.
yeah, so it's a
Yeah.
kind of feature of law, so that you would behave yeah, like sort of in a way that you would love your neighbor, right? So if you knew
Mhm.
that something was wrong or rotten, you would tell them, or you know, they but I think those things only work in a high trust society, and we no longer
Mhm.
live in a high trust society. And so-called petty crimes like theft and shoplifting are no longer really being punished. So we've seen enormous rise in those kind of crimes, if you see what I mean, because they're no longer punished, basically.
Right, because so much of that gets policed, not even by the police. And, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of Foucault or anything like that. But it is always striking to me. One of the things that I took from Foucault is that, there was a time in which we didn't have police. We had modern civilizations, through the Industrial Revolution and well into the 19th century, where we didn't have a police force. And so you kind of wonder, well, how did things get sorted out? And to me, there must have been a prevailing sense of right and wrong, a shared and prevailing sense of right and wrong, that I owed you something because, Nina, you're my neighbor, and you owed me something because, I'm your neighbor. And, that's gone. And I'm struck, why did we think that we could gut the soul of the thing, get rid of the soul of a thing, and continue to sort of reap the benefits of a system established by something that's ultimately making claims, a metaphysical claim?
Well, indeed. And I think we've got to think about liberal individualism and the sexual revolution, and this idea that the most important thing is for individuals to come up with their own version of the good and pursue their desire. And, any idea of the common good or anything like that just disappears, right, in the face of the invention of the individual. And I think in Britain it's interesting because the police were sort of brought in after the army massacre at Peterloo. So it's like the state wanted to create another force that wasn't so directly, obviously, the state wielding its power, right? So it's almost like, it's the people kind of managing themselves, as it were. But the police in this country are now, I mean, insofar as they are of any use, which is questionable, they are also captured. They're also part of the kind of lanyard class in many ways, So you see the police arresting people for angry tweets and
right. I mean, and again, like as an American, I got to tell you, like, that's just shocking to me.
Yeah, it
really is shocking to me. I don't. It's pretty wild. And of course, so we live through our own sort of iconoclastic moment here in the United States, and I know it trickled on over to your neck of the woods as well in 2020. With the whole George Floyd thing, and it was such a strange inversion of things, and as a personally religious person, it was so obvious and clearly a religious revival that was not being called a religious revival. What I don't, and I still don't think that people are sort of properly framing what has happened in the last 5 years.
Sure, or maybe 10 years in a way, or maybe
right,
longer.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was Thatcher, for example, in particular, who closed the industry in Britain, right? So the actual move towards this new economy has actually been going on for a long time. The denigration of the working class has been happening for a long time, and so on. So, but yes, at the cultural level and political level, we often copy America quite rapidly, right? We accept, for example, American claims about race, which are not actually really appropriate for the UK.
So totally different. Yeah, it's totally different. Yeah.
But for some reason, we just sort of because of the internet, in a way, this kind of strange proximity to an ideology. I think a lot of people are struggling because it is difficult to describe the history of the present through, is this a new religion? Is this a kind of inversion of Christianity? Is this, people talk about Gnosticism, or some people talk about demons, or, I mean, it's difficult to say, is this a new religion, or is it not? Is it something with religious features? There is clearly fanaticism at work. There's clearly, I think, a kind of mortal sainthood, with the actual, like the sort of thing about Luigi Mangione is this kind of.
Yes, and that's coming. Watch, pay attention. I know, we get in trouble for noticing things, but pay attention. I'm pretty sure his first public hearing is around Labor Day, so September 1st, thereabouts. in this country. So I think you're going to see another kind of ritualistic moment manifest here directly, I think, and that is sort of just explicitly a kind of left-wing saint in the making, you know.
And I think, you know, lots of people have been reading various previously sideline figures like Ivan Illich. I'm very keen on Illich, but also René Girard would be obvious, because Girard makes it clear that basically what survives of Christianity or post-Christian cultures is victimology and the law. You know, the law is supposed to take the place of religion, and I think we've seen this kind of attempt to create victim classes for people to identify with victim roles, usurping the place of Christ. You know, Christianity in a way understands the problem precisely, or the temptation of mobs, of everything like that, of denunciation and sin, and you know, puts Christ in the position of dying for our sins, right, preemptively, so that we don't have to scapegoat each other, right? I mean, this is a very functional account. It's too flat the way I'm putting it, but
no, you're exactly right.
You know, in the absence of that, as a widely held belief, as translated into politics and to the way we treat each other, yes, I mean, perhaps it was predictable that we would end up with new victim classes, new modes of fanaticism, new mobs, new new scapegoats.
Because it seems to me that the spirit behind all of that doesn't go away if you just get rid of the external mechanisms of it, right? It's a remaining thing. It needs it, like, and again, I'm fairly comfortable with woo. So, but it needs some kind of expression.
Yes.
And it's going to find an expression, and I think, you're an Anglo-Catholic, I'm a Catholic, like ritually every Sunday, and sometimes even during the week, we go and we participate in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, right? So there's a way in which I'm kind of ritually enacting, plugging myself back into this sort of event, this sacrifice. That's got to have a way of tempering my otherwise powerful spirits to do any number of things that are, I don't know, not good for the common good, or the public scene.
Completely. And I think, if you read Joseph de Maistre on the sort of history of sacrifice, it's very obvious that the kind of transition from direct sacrifice, be it animal or human sacrifice, to symbolic sacrifice is one of the great inventions anthropologically, because it is an anthropological point that human beings will otherwise behave in these sacrificial ways, and that those sacrifices will become direct and visceral and violent, and the mob the mob will return. And I think, at Easter, when the congregation plays the role of the mob, 3 days earlier we celebrate Christ.
So powerful. Totally.
And I think to remind oneself constantly of your own capacity to be a member of the mob is also central to Christianity. You're not exempt from that deep desire for whatever, revenge,
or
sadism or cruelty. We're all broken, we're all harmed, we're also capable of harming. And I think now we have a class of people who don't recognize that they too are capable of sadism, actually, because they think that they are good, and they think that they're doing good. And who doesn't want to think that they're doing good? This is an incredibly powerful motivating desire.
And Aquinas would say that we all believe that we are doing the good.
Yes.
Like even the assassin, even we all, we don't act unless we have some conception of the good that my action participates in.
Exactly. But I think it's that absence of the recognition that we are also capable of doing harm, and even things we think are good actions may not be so, and that our brokenness is always there, and the best we can do is to try to understand it and ameliorate it, and not act on those sort of dark desires, but they're never going away.
Which makes progressivism kind of a problem, it would seem to me, because progressivism, like my own sort of original red pill moment or whatever pill moment back when I was 19 years old, was that we're not getting better every day.
No.
and I had and it was the first time, it was actually in reading Homer, it was the first time that I realized that I had bought hook, line, and sinker this kind of unspoken creed that I am better because it's the 90s, right? And I am better than people from the 50s because it's the 90s. And
Yeah.
you know, and I'm embarrassed even in retrospect that how much I had internalized a mythology, a kind of an unspoken mythology. And, you know, so it seems to me that progressivism relies upon that unspoken belief.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but that powerful narrative of progress, especially after the sort of collapse of the bipolar world, if you like, you know, into the there is no alternative, whether one was a leftist or not.
Right.
You know, we all bought in, or we were sold at scale, the idea of progress, you know, and oh, well, we've got mobile phones now, we must be better than a medieval peasant, you know?
Right.
Like,
And even just like closer to home, Nina, it was like, I know how to work, you know, I can program my mom and dad's VCR, they can't. So clearly we're better. You know?
Right. And everybody, I mean, it's because the technology allowed us in many ways to separate ourselves from the anthropology, and we were
that's good. I like
taught to forget that humanity actually is pretty much the same. You know, I mean, this is why also more beautifully we can read texts from 2,000 years ago and understand them to the extent that we're able, if you see what I mean. If people were really so different,
I mean, that's my whole life. I mean, I've staked my entire professional life on that very fact. But claim.
It's true, you know, otherwise the past would just be completely obscure and incomprehensible to us, but it's not. When we read love poetry, when we read the Bible, when we read ancient texts, we do understand, because we're the same people, albeit, you know, and the differences are we overemphasize the differences because of this progress fantasy, which is in many ways collapsing as well. You know, there was no end of history in that sense, right? It's and indeed the tools that we have taken up with alacrity being an operative word, you know, in the name of convenience and efficiency, are actually destroying what makes us human, right? This is I mean, Illich would be key here, but many others have made similar points.
This point came flooding back home to me. You know, a couple of years ago, I took on a different class. I'd been teaching fourth and sixth formers, and so I took a third form class, and we were reading the Odyssey, and I had read the Odyssey in college, and and I was familiar with the sort of the Homeric world, but in reteaching it, so I started teaching it again in 2021. Yeah, it was 2021, and I had not read the Odyssey probably for about 20 years. It had been, and I know you know this as a teacher. When you read something to teach, it's just next level. I kid myself. Did I even understand anything before I had to read it to teach it? I mean, yes, of course, the answer is I did understand something, but it broadens it out. Anyway, what struck me so much about the Odyssey and Homer's world was just how deeply religious it was. I as a modern Christian, I had sort of thought of religion as Christian or Jewish or Islamic, right? Yet hearing I'm reading it, and of course this is such an obvious point, but they're constantly trying to engage the gods, both for favor but also for acts of propitiation. It's like they're constantly understanding that if they don't somehow regulate or manage their relationship with the divinities, these forces, then you're shit out of luck. And so Odysseus's entire, sort of arc is him kind of trying to get right with the gods.
Yeah.
And so therefore, we are too. That's
Absolutely.
what we're trying to do too. And it's just such an easy point to forget, I think.
Totally. And I mean, just to go back to the lanyards, wearing religious symbols around your neck,
totally,
or
totally.
I mean, all of these kind of mantras and these sorts of like secular liturgies is that's what they are. They are forms of and appropriation, like, to the state, oh, this is the state ideology, I must worship it. They are religious modes of behavior, because we are religious. That's what humanity is.
I totally agree. Homo religioso, it's like we are, it's what we are. Why doesn't it work? This modern version, this kind of lanyard class version of religiosity.
I think partly because a lot of the ideas are false, and partly because it's a horizontal religion. I mean, some people have talked about the return of paganism. Louise Perry has made this argument that we are repaganizing. I think possibly it might be historically, I don't know how to say this, but the human tendency towards forms of animism and paganism are very strong, actually, and in the absence of Christianity, we will repaganize, right? What that means is a complicated question, but I think there's a return to the material plane. I mean, the lanyard class are obsessed with status. It's all about kind of social recognition within a class, and that leads to conformity. So even if there's cognitive dissonance, I'm not sure I understand or I agree with what's being presented, you kind of go along with it, especially because the victimology thing is so powerful. People want to be nice. Oh, this group of people are suffering, we are privileged in relation to them, therefore we have a kind of, and I think that the way in which some aspects of Christianity have been taken out of context and then elevated without other aspects has also, I mean, everyone from Tom Holland to, I don't know, the post-liberals are trying to understand the how that happened, right? Like, does Christianity give us liberalism? Does Christianity give us individualism? And like the Larry Siedentop argument, the invention of the individual, or is this a kind of, are these Christian heresies? Are these something else, or are these revival of animism or paganism, but they don't understand themselves as being that, right? So it's not like people are walking around saying, yes, I'm a religious being and that my religion is progressivism. People wouldn't.
I recently read Rusty Reno's book Return of the Strong Gods, and to my audience, I highly recommend it. I think it's a really, really important book, actually, and I think it came out in the middle of COVID, so it's been kind of like not, people are talking about it on some podcasts and sort of things, but I think he's really on to something about this, the open society, and the desire to tame the sort of the passions that gave us Hitler. It's always about that, always. And, the lanyard class seem to be the last believers in the so-called open society. But irony of ironies, the priests of the open society are sort of the most repressive of all of the neo-religions.
Yeah, totally. And I think once you have an idea of a kind of liberal individual desire, everyone gets to reinvent the moral will for themselves, which is also like very punitive, a very high demand, to be honest, and very,
What do you mean? What do you mean high demand?
Well, first of all, to say to someone you are an individual before you are a member of a family or a community or a country, I mean, is a very isolating and atomizing thing to do. And I think the 90s, for all of their greatness in a way, we were already in that thing, desire is good, it's fine if you want to go and take drugs, that's your choice,
it's you do you. I mean, that's the truth.
Selfhood is like a journey and an experiment, and it's not relational primarily. But then you end up with people who who are completely atomized, addicted, lonely, friendless, completely out of any kind of social fabric. I mean, that's really the success of liberalism. I mean, Patrick Deneen makes this point that liberalism failed because it succeeded.
Yeah.
Insofar as that's the terminus of the liberal individual. So
I think he's basically right. I think he's basically right about that. Deneen.
I think, I mean, he puts it to maybe bluntly, but I think there is truth in that claim, because in a way, if you emphasize those things above all else, then of course you make a god of yourself, and then it's sort of, well, it's one step from there to say, well, okay, you believe that, I believe that, well, let's not judge each other. And as we're seeing, I mean, many Western countries, this clash of desires is very ugly, because some people want recognition for things that are actually detrimental to the social good and to themselves, actually. But there is no longer really like a metaphysics or religious foundation from which to say, actually, what you're doing is harmful, or it goes against nature, or goes against natural law, or it goes against the common good, because that too would be perceived as a actually very judgmental position, and it's your position,
and fundamentally oppressive, right? I mean, it's fun, and to me, like, I think, the sort of the casual patois of patriarchy and supremacy, and they all are operating under the specter, the boogeyman of oppression,
Yeah, and I think it's very powerful, I mean, I think when we were younger, sort of capitalism was this sort of oppressive structure that we were somehow, but it wasn't as understood as a series of relations or anything like that, or it was this kind of, quite Gnostic idea that there's almost like the archons or something. We're living in this.
I remember in graduate school, I have a MA in English, and I was in graduate school in the late, the mid 90s, so it was 95, 96, and 97, and at that time in the academy here, it was, there was they had a lot of sort of post-structuralism, a lot of Derrida, a lot of Damon, but also Deleuze and Guattari, and all of that stuff, right? And so I was taking a class, and it was literally called Gender, Narrative, and Property. And at this point, I had already read my way back into, I guess, what we would just call traditionalism. I was a Catholic, and I was a pretty serious intellectual Catholic, but I knew what I was getting into, right? It's just like, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, put my force up. But I remember we were talking about, in every course, no matter if it was in 19th century British novel or 20th century American, or, Chaucer, every course you had to buy, that little red Norton book, the Marxist Reader, the Marx Engels Reader. And so anyway, we're in class one day, and everybody knew that I kind of wasn't really a Marxist. I wasn't, but I was polite. So, but we're talking about, the base superstructure and, capitalism and all this kind of stuff. And I just kind of raised my hand in the middle of a seminar, and I said, y'all are talking about these things as if they're like Athena and Apollo and Zeus. Like, you're talking about them like they're gods. And it's like silence. So anyway, so they kind of move on, but it is a way for modern man to talk about gods without talking about gods. And so therefore you can blame gods for things.
Totally. Exactly. So this happened, as you say, with patriarchy. I mean, the idea that if we actually lived in a patriarchy, you'd be able to kind of constantly criticize it. I mean, I don't think so.
Oh, I know. No, it's so amazing. It's so amazing.
I tried to sort of confront some of this in this book I wrote a few years ago about men, and the mistreatment of men, not to sort of plug my own work, but I was really responding to what I could see was just, unbelievable black and white thinking that bore no relation to reality, and also bore no relation to the relationships that I have with men, like my brother, my father, my friends, my husband. That the idea was that men as a category were somehow ontologically rotten,
Mhm.
I mean, simply isn't true. I mean, it's a very, very dangerous idea, and as we've seen, it's kind of divided men and women socially and otherwise
But
along
what
very,
strikes me about it, Nina,
yeah,
it's so robust. Like it's because of its simplicity. It's kind of a blunt force
yeah,
weapon, so it's so robust. I don't know if I have quite the right word for it, but it's like you can. It has on that kind of that first level of analysis. It kind of has some explanatory power
mhm.
that shuts down any appreciation for complexity. And so that's its power in some
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like I don't know if you've ever been sort of very sleepless or in a very bad state, and you have a kind of paranoid thought,
way.
and a
Mm-hmm.
paranoid thought strikes you with a sort of greater
It's
force,
it's
perhaps,
true.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
than everyday, thoughts that come to mind. And I
Mm,
think we're sort of stuck. You end up stuck at that stage. Becomes a sort of paranoid way of seeing everything, right? Oh, we
mm,
can read everything through this lens, but it's, as you say, completely. There's no room for ambiguity,
mm,
dialectics, opposition. It's just this explains everything. But
mm.
you might say, well, that's actually giving way too much power to these new gods in a perverse way, right? And
Yeah.
having negative effects, detrimental effects. I mean, this is why I think Jordan Peterson, for at that point, was very powerful, and actually offered a lot of young men in particular, but not only, a way out of um, that sort of paranoid structured way of thinking, because it did say, actually, you can do something about your life. Okay, maybe it's sort of basic, but actually,
It's
tidy
real.
your room.
No,
It-
it's you're right, it's real. It's real. And I think it speaks so in your book, for my audience, I mean, what do you notice? What are you laying out there? Because
yeah, so
this is a subject that's really important to me because as I told you off camera, I live and breathe and work. I work at a boarding school, so I literally live with and teach and coach and go to dinner with kids,
Mhm.
with boys and girls. It's a co-ed boarding
Mhm.
school, and I just see this real impasse that is almost anyway. Go ahead. What are you seeing in this?
Well, I mean, I started to notice this sort of top-down story about mutual suspicion, basically,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which was being pushed a lot in the liberal media, I would say, and then it sort of became this attack on men as a class, like
Mm-hmm.
we're familiar with toxic masculinity and
Yeah.
these kind of phrases, and
Yeah.
and so everyone's behavior sort of came under suspicion. Oh, it's and I think, how do I explain this? It seemed to work as a wedge, as you say, to
Mhm.
divide men and women and to stop people recognizing their common and shared life, at the same time as sexual difference was sort of being
Yeah, yeah,
becoming taboo
yeah,
as a subject. And partly we can give economic explanations for this. I mean, Illich talks about modernity as the erasure of gender in his
yeah,
weird use of the word, but the idea of separate spheres and the idea that culture is largely about preserving sexual difference, also in its in its difference, right? And it's
mhm,
interesting to go back to the 90s, where lots of people, for all their faults, were trying to defend difference,
mhm,
actually, because I think they could
mhm,
see this sort of collapse of the recognition of difference coming at a certain level. So sexual difference, oh, that's something to be erased, or we can choose our identity that is somehow different from our biological reality or our God-given sex. Um,
yeah.
so that was happening at the same time as men as a class were being really demonized.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah,
And
I
there's a way in which young boys will kind of act that out. Like there's like if you're constantly being preached something, even if you disagree with it or don't like it, there's a strange way in which it kind of wraps you up and kind of casts a trajectory so that like you think we're inherently bad and destructive and toxic. Well, then fine, I'm going to
yeah,
be bad and toxic, and I'm going to run through women, and I'm going to do all those kinds of things. And it's like, yeah, well, no wonder, because that's kind of what you told them
they
to
were.
do, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and it was so obviously going to be counterproductive in that way. And I think it's no surprise that you end up with really bad male role models like Andrew Tate and others,
Totally,
because they're, what they're doing is saying the things you're not allowed to say, and
right.
that becomes immediately attractive and transgressive. And if everyone else or your culture is saying, well, you're bad anyway, you think, well, why shouldn't I just be as
Yeah,
bad as possible?
yeah, the boys in particular are fire hosed this narrative. It's just jammed down their throats, and so when somebody's saying the naughty things, there's immediately this sense. Again, I think Tate's a perfect example. Like, he's saying all these ridiculous things, but on some level, there's true things that he's saying in the midst of all of his bravado and machismo. And I think of a 15-year-old boy, and they've been mollycoddled, but like in this weird tyrannical sort of way,
Yeah.
throughout the course of their education. And then this guy just gives zero shits. I mean, he's just like, what is his question? Like, what color is your Bugatti? It's just like, he's only possible in a world that was created by the people who hate him the most.
No, completely. And I think, if we're going to start using phrases like toxic masculinity, then we also have to talk about toxic femininity. And, I mean, the right wing way of talking about this would be the longhouse, the sort of feminization of institutions, including especially schooling, where sort of feminine coded things about sort of being nice and safe and caring become sort of tyrannical and sadistic. And they actually work against, let's say, boys' energy, right? They're often a lot more energetic than girls, and a lot less socially conformist, and so on and so forth. And those things are coded as sort of almost terroristic. And not, rather than something that is natural and different about boys and girls, right? It's like it for some reason the West in particular seems incapable of holding the two in its head, right? Everything becomes reduced to a certain oneness, and so sexual difference and the fact that men and women and boys and girls are different has become something that to be ironed out, but then the new model becomes solved. Yes, a problem to be solved. And the use of medication and the sort of rise of diagnoses across the board, and people identifying into mental health problems and so on. I mean, this is also really symptomatic of a kind of a culture that has lost the spiritual, in favor of the therapeutic and the medical. It's like the horizon of the solution must be medical, bureaucratic, technocratic.
Right.
It can't be spiritual. When I think a lot of these problems are spiritual problems.
Totally.
That we all have.
Yeah, it's like boys were given speed and porn, and girls are given Instagram.
Yeah, and the contraceptive pill and SSRIs.
Yeah, right, of course. Yeah. I think Louise and Mary are so right about that. That those technological advances have truly set up a novel environment that is at odds with our baseline physical and ultimately spiritual reality. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the technology bit. How do you see technology as a sort of a driver of our social maladies?
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much with Mary and Louise on most things, many things. I mean, I might have a slightly more poetic take, but Louise is tapping into kind of evolutionary biology and various other things, and so Mary says that the pill is like the first transhumanist technology because it divorces sex from procreation, the act from its consequences, and the sexual revolution in many ways is who does it benefit? It benefits the cad.
Exactly.
It's the person who actually previously would have been enormously socially shamed for his behavior. So shame has gone out the window. Women are then sort of encouraged to be more like men in the sense of somehow detached from their biological capacity. You can be a worker. You don't have to have children and all of those sorts of things. Or you can
and you can even be a predator. Like, yay, us, right? It's like I was on X, I think, the other day, and you get all these ridiculous things, right, that show up on your feed, and there was this. It looked like it was a repurposed TikTok video that was posted on X, but it was something that was like, it was a video of a young woman, I would say in her late 20s, and the tagline is like, "When you're a 6, but you pull a 10," and in internet patois, that's like, you're like slightly above average good looking, but you landed like, a super hot guy, right? And I'm looking at this, I'm just like, that's not a brag. Like, you do know that men left to their own devices are probably just going to sleep with whatever opportunity they have. And yet on social media, she's sort of promoting this as like, yeah, like I pulled a 10. And it's just like for what? Like, what are you doing? Like, what are we bragging about here? There's just this weird ignorance at the heart of social media performativity. It's just, which seems to be particularly female coded on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if your concern is sort of social status and your image and projecting a particular image of your hotness, which you can then monetize. I mean, it's another depressing fact about Britain is that the only really profitable industries are the vice ones. So
Right.
OnlyFans, for example, this is very, very depressing. You're basically telling, and universities now are having apparently sort of workshops on how you can
entrepreneurialism, Nina. It's good for the economy, right?
Right. But how you can kind of monetize your sexuality and basically work as an escort, or as we used to say, a prostitute,
right.
to fund your university or whatever. I mean, just sort of like despair sets in, and I think that we realized too late that actually, like in Chesterton's sense, those fences were there for a reason.
Yeah.
Male sexuality is, as you describe, and that monogamous marriage, sanctified, is possibly, and certainly better for children, the best way to contain male sexual desire.
Yeah, right. Like, it was an achievement.
Right.
Like, it was actually something that we had kind of cobbled together, working against our worst natures to do something ultimately generative and productive. And so what's striking to me, and I don't know if I could have said this when I was 20 or even 30, is that, how do I say it? That these are ultimately spiritual problems.
Yeah. I think
and even as, again, I was a relatively young revert, at 20 years old, thereabouts, but I don't think I would have been like, oh yeah, like these are spiritual problems. But now, man, in 2020, I don't know if it's a function of my age or if it's just a function of where we are now, but it's so clearly a spiritual problem. And so now I'm just kind of thinking to myself, how do you address, I think of places that are trying to legislate their way out of the demographic cliff or what have you. And I just kind of, I mean, that's fine, I suppose, but it seems to me such a managerial cope to think that we can fix this this problem, which is fundamentally a spiritual one.
No, totally. And just to be clear, I think women have an equal share of responsibility in all of this, and it's not. This is, again, not men doing something that women are caught up in. I mean, sometimes it's that, but it's also the other way around. And I think we end up in this situation where, again, hard-won recognition of women's moral and spiritual capacity, and the fact that we also have responsibility for our decisions, is also being eroded in this when we start to say things like, "Oh, women are enough on their own," or that or someone was writing, maybe in a very harsh way, the other day on X, about how contemporary women are sort of becoming like pets, like exotic pets. Oh, they have no reciprocal responsibility to men. It's or something like this, and this obviously detracts from the idea that women have moral capacity and agency as well, and can make decisions and indeed take responsibility.
What do you make then of Louise's claim? She's been sort of talking about this idea of high agency and low agency, and not so much necessarily dictated by sex, but rather dictated by temperament. What do you make of that?
Well, I think, I mean, again, Christianity as a hard-won battle of, very wise understanding of the fact that people have different capacities and whether they're able to sort of reason and at the second order. It makes absolute allowances for that in the sense that you don't have to be intelligent to be good, for example.
Right.
And there will be difference at the empirical level, if you like, on the material level, there are differences basically in intellectual capacity and so on, and indeed amongst different populations for various reasons. And you have a structure that kind of allows for that somehow. But if you're asking everybody to operate at the level of a sort of 130 IQ complex moral agent, I mean, that's deeply, deeply unfair on people who can't. And modern life is very difficult. I mean, I feel like these bitter tears of rage when I see my competent parents struggling to download an app that they now have to use to park their car, and something like this. It's like modern life is increasingly complex and difficult in a way that it doesn't need to be, first of all, and that really punishes people who don't have any capacity or little.
It only benefits those of us who have a Stripe account.
Right.
And really, everything else is, if you don't, then it's all harder. Yeah, everything's harder.
Yeah, and I mean, alongside debanking, we have a basically de facto social credit system.
Right.
Whether we're not China, right? It's not official, but we basically do.
Oh, for sure. I mean, to me, that was one of the most sort of chilling parts of the post-COVID. Actually, there's no such thing as post-COVID. We're all post-COVID now, right? But that was the most chilling thing, is that they can control they've already manipulated the currency. The currency is already not what it is, but they can control who has access to it, and that's a chilling is just the word that keeps coming to my mind on it. So we've got this situation. We've talked about it. I think you're right. I think it's very difficult. It's very confusing. What do you tell young people? I got to where I am in some sense by I've been able to generate my perspective and my point of view, right? I jokingly told you earlier, I'm a heretic in terms of the culture. Like I've allowed myself to say things and to see things that those folks in power don't necessarily want you to say or think. And for me, that was generated by a deep engagement with old books. What do you tell people in terms of, like, how do you counsel them, or how would you counsel them in terms of how to negotiate and manage life in this sort of strange technocratic hellscape that we've fabricated?
I think a lot of it has to come down to real life relationality, right? And some of these are Christian values, like honoring thy father and thy mother, for example, recognizing that you come at the end of a long line of ancestors, that you're part of a culture that may be in a bad state right now, but that you have a sort of relational belonging and a history, and also, I suppose, to pursue enthusiasms that may not be popular, right? Whether it's reading old books, or you periodically have these revivals of things like Stoicism, for example, which are quite interesting, particularly among young men. My brother got my brother left school at 16, but later on became very interested in Stoicism as and it makes sense why that would reappear at a particular point, right?
Well, so there's a manliness to it, right? There's a sort of a sense of it,
Absolutely. And so I think and also forging loyal friendships, I think, is very, very important, because a lot of the condemnation and cancel culture depends upon weak social ties, really.
True.
And one thing I've learned through my various sort of trials by fire is that the importance of loyalty, actually. Also, for me, I'm not demanding loyalty in a unilateral way. I think,
right.
And so to stick by people, for example, particularly when they're being accused of things or being denounced, to be loyal to have a community. I mean, this is the left are constantly saying, oh, we need new social movements, we need to start a new party because we need better social ties. And it's like, well, they never learn anything from the church, which is like, has been doing that for a very long time.
For a long time. A very long time.
You know, when I go to church, the congregation is my community.
Yeah.
You know, you know people, you can trust them. That there is it's real. You know what I mean? And I know that if I was in serious trouble, financially or otherwise, that there is a way of sort of managing that isn't this kind of terrifyingly isolated, atomized, oh, you have to sort everything out sort of way. So I think having those forms of, I don't know, real life realities. You know?
Yeah, but Nina, the energies all work against that kind of that kind of prescription. Because I think of the kids that I teach, and I think there's no sense of place, right? All of the kids are counseled, to whatever, follow their dreams or what have you. But all of the kids are counseled essentially, or de facto counseled, to leave home, leave your hometown, go to New York or Boston or LA or Chicago, get the, and so I worry about that kind of burrowing out of those, that kind of nested reality that could hold them, to embrace them. And so, but again, that's also technologically driven too. So I don't know. I worry. I really worry about it.
Yeah, no. The role of cities is key. I mean, these sort of megalopolises that draw. I mean, Spengler talks about the role of the city in the destruction of a culture. Basically, when a civilization ossifies, it usually ends up with massive cities.
Yeah.
Sure. And I wonder if we'll see a shift away from that, going to college somewhere else in order to join some fantasy of an international elite or whatever.
Right.
Now I think, well, actually, only a very small portion of people should probably go to university. Actually, not that many people are have negative capability or are able to kind of hold to contradictory ideas in their head, or do you know what I mean, or pursue the truth.
Yeah.
Because social pressure is so strong, to conform.
Yeah, which reminds me of what you said earlier about, one of the initiatives of Blair, was that 50% of the population should have what is essentially an elite credential.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not scared of saying things like elite. And I also recognize that, in some different epoch, maybe I wouldn't have gone to college, right? I don't come from some fancy, I don't come from a fancy family or anything like that. But I think that the push toward credentialism has really done a number on us, and social media plays a real role in giving us kind of cope. That we long for it, but it's like a drug. It's like a bad drug. It's like I long for the high, I long for the hit, but every time I go to it, I'm getting further and further and further stripped of my context.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of question and antagonism that anyone who's involved online has to deal with. And I think at some point everyone dreams of exit, in that sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I compare my life to my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, left school at 16, trained as a builder and a plumber and an electrician, is married and has 2 children, lives near my parents. His life, I would say, is a better one than mine.
And you live in London. You live in London.
Yeah, and I say that without resentment. It's the path he chose is a much more serious and secure and responsible one than mine. I was always seduced by poetry, culture, frivolity, crazy ideas, weird people, and I don't regret that, but I think that shouldn't be the norm. I'm not a good role model. In a mimetic sense, whereas I would say my brother is a good role model.
Right. Well, maybe we'll get to the point where the contradictions of late neoliberalism will fall upon itself, and maybe we can go back to real communities, real in life places, as real meat space, but for real. So, well, Nina, I we're coming up on time here. I really want to thank you for coming on. You don't know me from Adam, so I appreciate you coming here onto the Underneath. Where can people find your stuff? I wanted to talk to you about insensitivity readers, but we didn't get to it because I just, whatever. Sorry about that. But where can people find you?
I guess these days generally on Substack, which I'm very pro. I think it's a very good place for writers and people who are interested in long form. I certainly find my reading much improved from being in Substack. I mean, of course, it's also social media, so
yeah.
But I think it's superior to other forms. So I have a Substack where I write slightly deranged poetry about birds, often that
Love
kind
it.
of thing. Just for my own entertainment. And but yeah, I mean, I offer editing service. Basically, there's lots of people who would like critical feedback, and I guess I'm largely in the kind of post-academic, para-academic world. Largely people who are autodidacts.
I had a note, when I prepare for a show like this, I write myself a bunch of bullet points of like things I can talk to Nina about. And one of them, I wanted to talk to you about being a kind of post-academic. In my own undergraduate years, I studied a group of Southern poets called the Fugitives. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they were young intellectuals who found themselves as Southerners in the United States, somewhat at odds with the kind of New England coastal WASP establishment. And they were kind of building out a kind of culture of talking back to the prevailing culture of commerce and all of that. But anyway, we didn't get to it. But anyway, you should, if you don't know them, you should check them out, because I think they're kind of spiritual ancestors for what you're trying to do in this post-academic space. Because we have to do something with all this stuff that we've done, right? So anyway.
Yeah, why not?
All right, well, thank you so much, Nina. And everybody, do your thing. All the links will be in the show notes below. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye now. Bye, Nina.
Bye.